Good to be with you here once again at Midweek Manna. I hope you're not feeling blue like this little guy. What was the old song? Put on a happy face. So we're going to go to 1 Timothy again. And as we realize, we're getting very close to the end of this letter. But again, some of you come back and said this particular study may mean as much to you as any that we've done. And you're glad that we've gone through it because, again, some of you have admitted to me that you really knew certain highlighted scriptures that's found in 1 and 2 Timothy, especially 2 Timothy. Once we get there, chapter 3 is well known. And but here we are realizing that, wow, this wasn't just for pastors. It is about leadership, but it's also about character and about attributes that should develop in the life of a believer. And so in today's time together, we're going to go to chapter 5, and we're going to kind of break it up. This one here, as we read verses 1 and 2 starting off, you will realize that this part of the letter is heavily influenced by the thought of Paul now kind of giving very practical people skill advice. So once again, it applies to all of us, but especially in any level of leadership. So let me take just a moment with that. I have served this church twice. The first time I was hired as a youth pastor, and in time, I was awarded the responsibility of being an associate pastor. And then I was elevated to a title that I was very uncomfortable with, and that being co-pastor. And I never promoted that. I never allowed it to go in print. Some people recognized it, wanted to promote it, but I just didn't feel comfortable about it. And finally, I went to Brother Langdon and I said, okay, I think I have the defining way to communicate. I said, let's allow you to remain with the title of senior pastor and just leave me with the title of pastor. So where there was still a distinction, because I knew that we were not going to be co when it came to final decisions, bottom line decisions. And that worked fine. So that was over the span of 7 years. Being back now for 23 years and having the title of senior pastor or lead pastor, I kind of like that, lead pastor, because of what I'm getting ready to say to you. When I came back, I had some say, well, we only have one pastor. I said, that's not true. Oh, yes, it is. You're the man. I said, well, you're kind of having fun with me. At the same time, you are stating a position of your mindset and of your heart. And I'm okay with you meaning that we have but one pastor who has the authority given by the Church of God, given by this congregation's allegiance, and quite frankly, in the eyes of God. However, the communication kind of breaks down. And what my statement always was, I said, no, I'm not the only pastor. And we haven't been that kind of church as long as I've known you and way before me. And what do you mean by that? I said, I was on staff here before. I was an associate pastor. I was a youth pastor. I said, so my position is we don't have enough pastors. And if you really want to know my position, even though we don't use the title pastor for everything, and I think that is proper, all you have to do is change that word pastor to one other word, and it helps. And that is shepherd. Then you realize we have multiple shepherds. You have Sunday school teacher shepherds. You have youth pastor shepherds. You have children's church shepherds. And you finally realize, wait a minute, I like that term, because we realize sometimes you are given an assignment where it is one-on-one. Sometimes it is a very small group, but you have a small group leader that is, maybe, yes, facilitating, as we use that term today, trying to keep the circle intimate to where you don't have a big I and little U's, and yet you still have to have structure and guidance and oversight. And so, we use the term facilitator. The truth is they're shepherding over these other people in that small group, and it may be a short-term responsibility, maybe long-term. So I've taken a couple minutes here, but I want you to know the position that I still have in my heart. And so when you see it that way, now you see what really opens up the study even more. And as we get into some of these things where Paul definitely was talking to Timothy, we still know it was done under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. We still have the privilege of gleaning information today. And again, what have I said all through this particular study? Context. It is the content and the context. So with that being said, let's now read together 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, in all purity. So again, now we're talking about the responsibility of discipline. And obviously, that's not anything that any of us jump up and down to do. I can tell you real quickly that now that I'm older, it's expected much more freely by others, because there are very few people older than me that I wind up having to discipline, even though it's not always the case. The percentages have dropped immensely. However, when I was younger, and not only leading older people, and not only learning to accept the fact that people older than me biologically are looking to me as a father type, a priest type, the pastor type, it just takes a while to accept that. But when it came to discipline someone older than you, especially when that somebody is old enough to be your biological parent and beyond, I don't care what personality type you are, introverted, extroverted, it's no fun. And so, again, Paul's writing to a younger Timothy at this time, and you see how he broke it down with the rebuke. It's always difficult. And so in doing it, you've got to look at yourself more than the circumstance that would bring a rebuke, more than the individual that has to be disciplined. You look at yourself. You got to make sure that your attitude is right. And if your attitude isn't right in the moment, then wait until your attitude can get in check. Because sometimes things blindside you, or they grossly disappoint you. Or there is a time restraint. You got other people now that knows about it, and they're clamoring for a resolve. And so a lot goes into it. So you got to check your motive and your attitude, and then it gets into other people skill things, body language, right? And learning how are you doing with your tone of your voice, and how are you doing with your posturing of your body. So again, I know some of you are saying, I dealt with that with my kids. But then some of you that quick are saying, yeah, but when my kids were younger at home, that's something that my spouse told me. Man, you got all the right in the world, obviously, to discipline, but you got to watch your tone, or you got to watch your adjectives, or you got to look at your body language. Well, that comes into play. So real quickly, as we kind of conclude that part, that is, treat everybody like family. And that's exactly what Paul was instructing Timothy to do. See each one, no matter what their age is, just kind of line it up in the natural, even though you're dealing now with the spiritual side of it. So with those older, show affection and show respect. Tell you what not to do. The old expression is, when the razor's coming, the lather always goes on first. So if you're placating somebody, patronizing them, they know that. So that's not what we're promoting here. But it does help soften if you can just say, now listen, we know we got a problem here. And I know that, you are an adult, and I know that you've got a lot of responsibility in family or business, or seen as a responsible person that this congregation looks up to. However, I want you to know that as a person, I respect you, or I respect things you've done. You might bring that out for a moment. So again, you're not patronizing. You're just establishing that I haven't been waiting for this moment to jump down your throat. However, we've got to address this situation. And again, body language and voice tones play a big, big part, because your attitude's going to show through those things. So to those older, show affection and respect, and to your peers, your contemporaries, again, show that brotherly love. I tell you what I did as a youth pastor. I did it with my own son growing up. There's always that, what I would say to a youth group is, listen, let's kind of go into the year. Let me give you a state of the youth group address, so to speak. And here's how I want to operate. I can be your buddy, or I can be your pastor. If I'm your buddy, and that's all you see me as, and I never teach you how to also see me with respect of a responsibility that I carry, then when those times of discipline come, when there's failure, whatever, I'm not able to help you. But if I'm your pastor, that doesn't mean that at times I can't buddy around with you. But I have established that I carry a responsibility that they don't. And if you're dealing with novices, whether it's teens in a youth group or adults overall, that's why we're given time together. I mean, there's more that goes on every time we gather than just the sermon of that day and the lesson of that day. We're building relationship piece by piece, brick by brick. And as a leader, you got to know that. You got to know the end game. You got to see the big picture. And no, you don't necessarily weight down a conversation like, oh my gosh, you're talking too much every time I see you. But you got to know in your heart, yeah, this moment today was good because I can see we're drawn closer, or they're respecting me more, or we've established a parameter, and da-da-da-da-da. And it finally, when you come into those situations and trust that you have longevity by the time you have to deal with a heavy discipline and rebuke, then you have kind of learned them, they've kind of learned you, and you've established, again, those guidelines. So again, to those that are of opposite sex, and he broke it down because Timothy obviously was a male, and in that he also knew that he'd have to deal with women and girls. He kind of helped as well with that. Do it in purity. So before we go to verse 3 through 8, verses 3 through 8, actually, let me also say real quickly that the Church of God still has a program, realizing that not all ministers have a completed Bible degree from an established college or university. So they do have a program in place. I went through it myself, called MIP, Ministerial Intern Program. And it's designed, when it works well, is that you are given the assignment to be an intern under a certain minister, who that minister may be the pastor that you already have. Then again, you may, for those months, go to another church so that you're under the tutelage of that particular pastor. And when all works well, you're given the privilege to sit in the counseling sessions that, again, everything is orderly and informed, communicated, go into deacon meetings, making pastoral visits into homes, what to do, what not to do, going into hospitals, learning just people skills, talking about financial responsibilities, watching oversight over budgets, discipleship, training leadership for the next level, and right on down the line. So that ministerial intern program is designed for you to get your waders on and get out a little deeper in the water without saying, okay, you're on your own and you better know how to swim. So that's what Paul was doing. It's just giving the practical information, but just hitting it that we got people and there's going to be issues. They're going to get into each other's stuff and they're going to fist fight. They're going to curse each other. They're going to be bitter one toward another. They're going to be involved in the church. It'll have its rippling effect throughout a congregation if you don't deal with it. So here we go. So good so far, right? We've learned this in our homes, right? Let's go to verses 3 through 8. So now, honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents. For this is pleasing. This is good stuff right here. This is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Oh, man. Strong stuff, right? Verse 7, command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Whew, man, I mean, wow. We see this all the time in our lifetime, don't we? We see where this counsel, with moral obligation, with respect to those older than us, to be obedient and subservient to those over us in the Lord. When you lose those things, or at least through ignorance, not continue to that, we wind up with some of the things we're dealing with today. So here he's talking about the fact that people die. And in that, those who remain are affected. You have some, I've been pastoring long enough now. I've seen, I think, just about every general category where someone has died very young to those who have died well up in years. Some have prepared, maybe because they felt like they had time. They were diagnosed with something that gave them time. Others just were planning for it. I know I'm aging and I'm going to have a will, and I'm going to have a DNR if that's my choice, and I'm going to have this and that, and have a power of attorney. All these things that do assist and help families, even to the point of these are my desires. This is how I want the funeral to proceed. I know I'm dying, or I'm going to die one day. So again, who's ever listening right now, do your family a favor. Now, when it came to leadership, and Paul's talking to Timothy about shepherding people, what he was really drilling in all of this is, don't overstep. Let me say it again. Don't overstep. Sometimes someone that we all loved, someone that was well respected, somebody that died tragically, somebody that it happened all of a sudden. It was a car wreck, plane crash, house fire. And these that are left, emotionally, we're all charged, and you just want to go ahead and take over. No. That's why it's here. This is why this has been preserved, I'm convinced, by the will of God. Where, again, we've talked context. We've talked about, well, how can you say this is all inspired of the Lord? Because that, just like you dealt with some of the women's issues in the church, you had to keep bringing in context historically to help guide why it was written the way it was. But then you come into something like this and you realize, wow, this is why the letter's preserved, because some of these things are ongoing. What Paul was instructing Timothy is family first. When that is applicable, when that is there, let that family take responsibility of their own family. When you sidestep that, you get hurt feelings. You also take on responsibilities that can be very weighty, where the family already has a moral obligation and hopefully a loving relationship that, no, this is how we honor. This was our father. This was our mother. And we're going to do it right. This is my brother. This is my sister. And so I'm so glad that we have this instruction. See, so now you're understanding more and more why this study is important to all of us. See, that's not just for pastors, is it? What if, you are in a small group, a house church? What if you're in a very small congregation and don't even have the privilege of hiring, as we say, a pastor, which in all reality is you're helping take care of responsibilities financially so that someone can shepherd over your souls. And people didn't read this on their own. It's like, well, man, what do we do now? So again, with the family there, when there is a widow indeed, that family needs to step up, and in most cases desires to step up. And not only in the immediate responsibilities of the occurrence of death and the responsibilities of funeral, but those first days, those first weeks, those first months of transition of that person is no longer here. The emotional scarring that can happen, depending again on all the different factors that goes into it. So again, family first. It's their responsibility. And then, of course, James 1:27, I won't turn there today, but you're probably familiar with, as it talked about pure religion and undefiled religion, you take care of the widows and the orphans. What subject are we talking about again? There has been a death. And especially in the time it was written, where, again, women didn't have any type of role to speak of in the public. That wasn't all, but generally speaking. And now the breadwinner, the provider is removed. Yeah, how's she going to pay bills? And especially if it's a young widow with young children. So again, he goes into the family being first, and then just that coming back to the responsibility now to all of us is a person that won't take care of their own family is worse than an infidel. In other words, don't get the attitude, well, I'll let the government take care of it. I'll let somebody else take care of it. Well, let's let the church take care of it. Well, sometimes all those agencies may be willing and may be available, but in other cases, not able or ignorant to what you're going through. No. First rule is family, and of course, then providing for the family. And it's our duty and it's our privilege. And we can talk, and we will, some about the aging process as well. So let me go ahead and at least touch it once, and that is the cycle of life. As my sister was transitioning, again, 67 years old. When we're kids, that sounds like that's too old. But as we age, we're like, wow, that really doesn't sound that old anymore. And so in the last days of transitioning, especially the very last 7 days, being moved to a hospice facility, all by design. It's what we desired, and God was wonderful to us as a family, and able to all that Susan's wishes were being honored. Christy and Ryan's wishes were being honored. God was helping us in all that. And in those last days, again, the communication began. You just see the transitioning. And so anyhow, one of the hospice nurses said to me, of course, I've been around it a lot, but again, now this was family. And just said, well, we come into this life through a cycle, and in most cases, we leave in the same mentality that it isn't done just in one step. And so you see that transitioning, just like gestation, bringing the formation in the womb, and then, of course, the birthing. And we say that's the beginning, but the beginning had already been going on for quite some time. And so it is with end of life. So you see that cycle. And again, for the family to realize this is our responsibility, no matter how long the passage of time is. And it is the privilege. Let's go on now and go to verses 9 and 10, because again, we're still talking about the widow. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works, if she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. So now we're talking about the older widows. Again, Paul is writing intentionally practical. And so again, with a widower, but again, I think the reason he was taking the time to really look like it was just focused on one situation, it's really both. But again, it was the culture where men worked and the women stayed at home. And we just know that's not the case anymore in most situations. So this is why the emphasis was given to the one extremely more vulnerable and typical for that time, and still plays out today, however, not in all situations. But again, as someone is an older widow, of course, and talked about her character. As a matter of fact, I pulled it up, the apostolic constitutions, and you don't have to go into all that, but they gave much notice. In other words, it was, again, practical insight in how to work with a community and all the multiplicity of things that can happen to people as you're given responsibility. And so in this, they said, give notice to the widows. Widows must be discreet. They must be, especially in their speech, they are to be meek, quiet, gentle, sincere. and they are to be free from anger and not a busybody, and to be charitable. In other words, you sound like, well, that's kind of cruel, man. They're the ones that just suffer loss, or especially that time they weren't seen by the public to speak of, and yet they were. And that whole thing of a godly character, and in other words, it is also God's oversight into all of it. That He knows the witness of this particular lady, and we're also going to put the men in there. God's going to take care of His own, right? I think that we will. Let's before we close out this session, let's go to verses 11 through 16, because again we're talking about widows. I do want to try to finish on that. So verse 11, but refuse to enroll younger widows. Now, that sounds kind of harsh, but let's see what it says. For when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. I'll explain that. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Again, verse 16, if any believing woman has relatives, you hear family, who are widows, let her care for them, and let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. That sounds harsh. He was not saying that if a wife loses her husband early on in the marriage, that she's not a widow indeed. That's not what it's saying. That's what it sounded like. But that's not what it's saying. So again, and of course, lifespan back then was different than today. To be 60 years old and older, you're already got one foot on a banana peel and the other one standing on ice. So it's talking about these younger widows. They are widows, yes. But when it talks about indeed, it talks about the responsibility, because he's talking about the younger women still have natural desire to have, and we'll use today's expression, a life's partner, and they've already lost this life partner. So, I enjoyed marriage, and I like being cared for. I like serving, all the things that goes into the matrix. And so, I desire that again. Maybe she didn't have children by the first spouse, and I still want to have children. I'm still capable. Or I have a child or two, but we had planned on a large family. I would like that if I meet somebody else. So when it's going in and talking about being idle, and the harder language there, of course, came in not only about being busybodies, but in that they said, verse 11, but refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. That's what sounded cruel. But what that was saying was they had made vows to in sickness and in health till death do us part. Well, some of the vows back then was, you are my beloved for life, and I'm married to you and with Christ. We have that covenant relationship. And so you've made this vow, not a thought, not a promise, but a vow unto God that this is my one and only. Well, your intention was one and only as long as I don't lose this person. But if I lose this person, and so a lot of times in ignorance, they didn't see that it was a possibility they might have to be a widow early on in life. That's what all that language is talking about. And again, being younger, again, with natural desires, or being fearful, again, back to the time. How am I going to pay for bills? Who's going to help me raise these children? On and on and on. Maybe I don't have other siblings. Maybe I don't have parents that can step back. So you can see where I want to get out and let the word know I'm in trouble and I need help, and can you help me? And then, of course, it can even get more sordid from that, and we won't go there. But as pastors and local congregation, you may have to deal with it. So we're going to finish up with one statement, and that is this idleness. That's just good information for all of us, right? Idle hands is the devil's, you got it, workshop. So it's about being diligent in life. It is about occupying until we return. You can just think of several scriptures that teaches us as believers that we need to live a purpose-driven life, to have a life purposed type relationship with God, to where my life is all about Him. My life's hidden in Christ. When it comes to responsibility of being a parent, responsibilities of family, on and on and on, I don't need to get distracted from my privileges and responsibilities, my duties, and just, well, and we think about, man, what internet has opened up, and so many just becoming filled with idleness. Boy, it's a sermon for another day. I'm not going to preach it this time. We're going to continue next time together, staying in this same chapter. But you can see there's so much here. And yes, this was very, very, very insightful, general, practical instruction. But you can see where each one of us glean. And I hope that we cleared the air on that there is not this slant toward women, and especially younger women. It is structure for health. And again, remembering, even for the younger, God is in control. And if they will remain chaste and faithful to Him, then He'll order their steps in the next season of life. Lord, we thank You for Your word. We thank You that it doesn't hide things. We thank You that it deals with life, and You're giving us life with purpose. So again, we are humbled by the fact that You have not only created us and put us out there on our own, but You stay involved in our life, and You give us multiple ways in how to communicate, how we can steer through the challenges of life. And we thank You because in that, You wrap it all up in Your personal love. We give You thanks and praise. In Your name, Jesus, amen. Until next time, God bless.